South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is visiting China this week, marking the country's first such visit in over 6 years. Lee's meeting with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping comes as his administration tries to walk a tightrope between the United States and China. Meanwhile, Beijing is making its demands to Seoul clear. On Monday, the South Korean president said he wants to open a new phase for relations with China, and China's Xi appears to be keen with Lee's proposals, suggesting the two countries should look after each other's core concerns. Analysts say Beijing is eager to boost ties with South Korea now because relations between China and Japan has fallen to the lowest point in years. It comes after the Japanese prime minister's remarks suggesting a military response if China invades Taiwan. South Korea hopes Beijing will pressure North Korea on missiles, but it remains unclear how much Beijing would do in reality. Just as South Korea and Japan are U.S. allies, North Korea is China's only treaty ally. Beyond geopolitics, Lee's delegation includes more than 200 South Korean business leaders. The two countries have signed 15 cooperation agreements in areas like technology and transportation. Lee also called for more cooperation in artificial intelligence, boosting cultural exchanges and supply chain investments. Retired Marine Colonel and Center for Security Policy Senior Fellow Grant Newsham weighs in on South Korea's president. He points to the leader's left-leaning views and a more sympathetic stance toward North Korea and China. Newsham also highlights Beijing's backing of North Korea, saying China could curb the country's threat if it chose to, but hasn't. Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Yes, glad to be here.
When it comes to China and South Korea, Lee is the first sitting South Korean president to visit China since 2019, and Xi's his first trip to South Korea in about 11 years there. Is this an indicator of growing regional stability and cooperation, or how should we read that relationship?
Well, it depends on your point of view. From the Chinese perspective, to them it's a good thing to have a South Korean president and an administration that is aligned with you, that sees you as the benign force, as the better bet. So they're glad to have Lee come to China and have a nice series of meetings where they say nice things, because they know that at a minimum this is going to sort of roil the waters inside South Korea domestically, but also it's going to cause some friction in the South Korea-U.S. relationship if the Lee Jae-myung administration is not careful. The Chinese are glad to see this. So from a United States perspective, the leftists who run South Korea now, they are not great fans of the alliance. In fact, the elder brother of the current prime minister, who has immense influence, he has described it as an imperialist trap, the U.S.-South Korea relationship. He's even called for getting the imperialists out of our land as soon as possible. So from a U.S. perspective, they're trying to ignore it and paper it over and not pick a fight over this. But the solidity of the U.S.-South Korea alliance has to be in some question. It's not as certain as it seemed, no matter if U.S. officials and everyone else calls it a rock-solid alliance. You have an administration that is sympathetic and sees South Korea's interests is better aligning with the PRC, and has a sort of just a very hard to understand affection for North Korea of all places. So it's not crumbling yet, but the long-term prospects, you do have to have some concern. And one of the big difficulties that these leftists have in South Korea is that most South Koreans, I'd say 90% of them, don't like China and don't like the Chinese. And the vast majority of them do support the U.S.-South Korea alliance. And that is a real break, a restraint on what Lee Jae-myung can do. So as long as this administration is in power and is behaving the way they are when it comes to, say, to China, to North Korea, but also domestically seeking to establish a one-party state and gradually taking control of every lever of power. And they're pretty far along on that. As long as that's the case, that the stability of the U.S.-South Korea alliance has to be in some question. And for regional stability, you do have to have the United States and its allies, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, South Korea, they do have to be aligned with each other in step to defend against an aggressive expansionist China, and to deal with really China's cat's paw, the North Koreans, who are now somebody that people have to take seriously given the weaponry that they have.